Godard, in addition to being a fanatic about cinema, was a fanatic about philosophy, still is a fanatic about philosophy, and conceived the project very early on to do in cinema what Jean-Paul Sartre did in philosophy, but, in his view, to do it better because of the distinctive aesthetic capacities of film. Breathless became the first existentialist film, the film in which a filmmaker's commitment to the moment of filming, to the expression of his thoughts, his passions, his whims, at the moment that he filmed, would be captured in the same way that the gestures of a Jackson Pollock were captured in his action paintings. The cameraman with whom Godard worked on Breathless, and on many subsequent films even up through the early 1980s, Raoul Coutard, had a great deal to do with Godard's ability to capture the reality of the moment in which he was filming.
Quand on est photographe de guerre, on n'a pas le temps de réfléchir à ce qu'il faut faire. Il faut travailler beaucoup à l'instinct. Bon, il faut être prêt à subvenir à n'importe quelle condition. C'est-à-dire que ça implique qu'il fallait être très au fait de la technique photographique elle-même. Bon, et en même temps, avoir la rapidité suffisante pour pouvoir décider des cadrages à faire, bon, quelles que soient les circonstances, pour qui, quand on est photographe de guerre, forcément un peu plus dangereuse que quand on est de plaie. C'est-à-dire qu'en réalité, finalement, ça m'a beaucoup aidé, par exemple, en particulier par exemple pour À bout de souffle, puisque quand on a tourné À bout de souffle, l'idée était de dire c'est un reportage qui est fait comme se faisait un reportage à l'époque, c'est-à-dire donc la caméra à l'épaule et pas de lumière. Donc pour moi, je veux dire, c'était pratiquement la même chose que si j'avais fait un reportage dans une unité combattante. Je veux dire. Bon, c'était, ça ne représentait pas un risque réel.
Coutard knew how to work under rough and ready conditions, and he did not have the classical training of the studio cameraman. This accorded with Godard's interests because Godard wanted to film Breathless something like a documentary. He wanted to use a minimal amount of added lighting, and when necessary, none, when possible, none. He wanted the actors not to wear makeup. He wanted the camera to be put on the cameraman's shoulder so that the crew could move quickly from setup to setup. And Coutard was ready, willing and able to do all of these things.
Bon, et puis surtout de tourner dans des, comme l'hôtel de Suède où on a tourné la chambre où Jean-Paul Belmondo rencontre Gene Seberg, bon, qui était une toute petite pièce, bon, et dans lequel c'est vrai qu'il était impossible de mettre de la lumière parce qu'il n'y avait absolument pas la place de rentrer. Il y avait juste la place de mettre le lit et la place de passer le dos au mur entre le bord du lit. Donc on n'aurait jamais pu mettre un projecteur classique de cinéma dedans. D'autant plus qu'à l'époque, il fallait alimenter ça avec des gros câbles parce que tout était alimenté en courant continu, ce qui est obligé. Donc je veux dire, c'était vraiment la révolution, là, je veux dire. Bon. Mais comme je n'étais pas très aguerri comme directeur de la photo, je veux dire, ça ne me paraissait pas d'un risque considérable, ça, quand même, non plus.
Having not had extensive experience on professional film shoots, Godard was ready to experiment with film technique in ways that other more experienced filmmakers weren't. He had something, and still has something, that most other filmmakers don't. Maybe at the simplest level, a spirit of contradiction, a willingness, in fact a desire to do things differently from the way others do them, just for the sake of doing it differently and to see what happens. Though partly from a philosophical perspective, he wanted to use technique technique was not an end, it was a means, and he wanted to apply his thoughts to the technique of film in order to see what would happen, as if a scientific or artistic experiment were going to result.
Quand on tourne avec Jean-Luc, on est toujours à une recherche expérimentale. Chaque film, à peu près, on essayait quelque chose de nouveau. Je veux dire, soit par exemple dans Les Carabiniers, où on a essayé de raconter cette histoire comme si c'était un film de cinémathèque, c'est-à-dire donc où il n'y a que des noirs et des blancs, très peu de gris. Bon, d'autres qui sont, bon, par exemple, La femme mariée, où le challenge était de dire on va faire un film où 8 semaines après le début du tournage, on aura la copie standard. Bon, il y avait toujours quelque chose qui soit différent et qui est une tentative de bousculer l'ordre établi.
After, you know, the little soldier, a woman is a woman, and so we said we have to find something different because we wanted to make a very special part every time. I mean, something very different. So we kind of said, well, she should be a little bit, you know, how do you say, a little bit sick, but not that sick, you know, but a little bit fragile in her mind. And then we choose costumes like you can see very normal young girls. I mean, like very classic, you could say. You know, not a lot of makeup and not like in the other pictures. And that's what I like with Jean-Luc Godard's picture, is that they're very different every time.
Pourquoi vous voulez absolument m'accompagner?
Je sais pas. On restera un moment dans la Simca. On écoutera la radio.
Oh non, on ne me permet pas de faire des choses comme ça.
Vous avez déjà embrassé des types?
Oh oui.
Vraiment, vous savez comment on fait?
Oui, avec la langue.
Bon. Alors on y va.
For Godard, being an existentialist filmmaker, being a filmmaker of the moment, meant implicating himself and his own personal life, his private life at the time of the making of the film, in his films. Just as in Le Petit Soldat we see the development of a relationship between Godard and Anna Karine, we can trace throughout Godard's films his own personal difficulties, joys, passions. In particular, in the early films, the main subject of those emotional extremes was Anna Karine and his relationship with her. It seems to have been a passionate relationship in every conceivable way. In effect, Godard was illustrating the dangers that awaited their relationship if, like the woman in the film who was a sort of a performer in a strip club, Karina fulfilled her desire to become a professional performer.
I worked with a lot of great directors, like Luchino Visconti, like George Cukor, like Fassbinder, like Jacques Rivette, like just to name a few. But of course, Jean-Luc Godard is what I have dearest, because also he was my husband, and he taught me everything, and it was like I was very young, and I learned a lot, and it was a big love story. So of course that's my very dearest souvenir.